They sold out stadiums on every continent. They spoke at the United Nations not once, not twice, but multiple times. They shattered records that the music industry didn't even know existed. BTS, 7 guys from a nearly bankrupt company in South Korea, became the biggest boy band the planet has ever seen. But here's the thing nobody likes to talk about. Behind the purple ocean of ARMY lightsticks and Billboard #1s, there are shadows. Controversies. Scandals that shook fandoms, trended worldwide, and forced even the most loyal fans to ask hard questions. What happens when a global idol gets caught in a DUI? What do you do when your favorite member wears a shirt that offends an entire nation? How does the industry react when stock market allegations hit one of the most beloved groups in K-pop history? And what about the dating scandals, the leaked photos, the private moments exposed to millions? Some of these stories were buried by agencies. Some were defended fiercely by fans. And some changed the way we look at idol culture forever. Tonight, we're counting down from number 7 all the way to number 1, the most shocking, the most controversial, and the most jaw-dropping scandals involving each member of BTS. No sugarcoating. No blind loyalty. Just facts, context, and the real story behind the headlines. 1 member per ranking, no repeats. So buckle up because this list, it's gonna hit different. Are you ready? Let's go. Number 7. Suga. The genius producer who fell off a scooter and nearly lost everything. You know what's wild? Out of all 7 members of BTS, Min, better known as Suga, was supposed to be the untouchable one. The quiet genius. The guy who locked himself in his studio for days, crafting beats that would later soundtrack the most dominant era in K-pop history. He wasn't the one chasing cameras. He wasn't the one making headlines for who he dated or where he partied. Suga was the workaholic, the introvert, the one fans always described as the most responsible Hyung. And that's exactly why, when his scandal broke, it didn't just surprise people, it genuinely shocked the entire fandom to its core. Because nobody, and I mean nobody, saw this coming from him. It was August 2020, right in the middle of the global pandemic, and Seoul was under strict social distancing guidelines. The city was tense. People were staying indoors. The world was watching South Korea as a model for how to handle COVID-19. And then, late one night, a police report surfaced. Min, member of BTS, had been caught riding an electric scooter through the Yongsan district drunk. Not tipsy. Not a little buzzed. His blood alcohol level was above the legal limit. He was riding alone, apparently on his way home after drinking, and he literally fell off the scooter right in front of officers. He didn't crash into anyone. He didn't cause an accident. He just tipped over. And the cops were right there. Now, in a lot of countries, you hear electric scooter DUI, and you might laugh. You might think it's a minor thing. But in South Korea, this was a full-blown crisis. Under Korean traffic law, electric scooters are classified the same as motorcycles and cars. That means a DUI on a scooter carries the exact same legal weight as a DUI behind the wheel of an SUV. We're talking potential license revocation, criminal charges, fines, and, in the court of public opinion, absolute destruction. And for an idol? In a country where public image is literally your career? This was a career-threatening event. Big Hit Entertainment, now Hybe, released a statement within hours. They confirmed the incident, they apologized on Suga's behalf, and they acknowledged that he had violated the law. Suga himself posted a personal apology to fans, admitting that he had consumed alcohol, made the poor decision to ride the scooter home instead of calling a taxi, and fell in front of the police. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to spin it. He said, plainly, that he was sorry and that he had let people down. And here's where things get interesting, because ARMY, the BTS fandom known for defending their idols to the death, was genuinely split on this one. A huge portion of international fans downplayed it, saying, it's just a scooter, relax. But Korean fans? Korean media? They were furious. Multiple Korean news outlets ran the story as a top headline. Commentators compared him to other celebrities who had been blacklisted for DUI offenses. Anti-fans dug up every old interview where Suga talked about responsibility and maturity and threw his own words back at him. The irony was brutal. This was the same man who rapped about grinding through poverty, who talked about mental health with raw honesty, who literally released a mixtape called D2 under his alter ego August D just months before the incident. Speaking of that mixtape, let's not forget that D2 had already dragged Suga into controversy earlier that same year. The track, What Do You Think?, originally contained a vocal sample from a speech by Jim Jones, yes, that Jim Jones, the cult leader responsible for the Jonestown massacre in 1978 where over 900 people died. When fans and media identified the sample, the backlash was immediate and international. Big Hit pulled the song, re-edited it, re-uploaded a version without the sample, and issued an apology stating that the production team had sourced the sample from a sound library without being aware of its origin. Suga personally expressed deep regret. But the damage was already in the conversation. So when the Suga DUI hit just a few months later, it felt like a pile-on. Two major controversies in 1 year for the guy who was supposed to be the safe member. The legal outcome? Suga was fined approximately 1.5 million Korean won, around $1,500 and had his license revoked. No jail time. No criminal record beyond the infraction. Legally, it was a slap on the wrist. But reputationally, it left a mark that took months to fade. What makes this story fascinating from a cultural standpoint is how it exposed the double standards in idol culture. Other Korean celebrities, actors, singers, TV personalities had their careers ended permanently over DUI charges. Some were removed from shows, dropped by sponsors, and essentially erased from the industry overnight. But Suga? He survived. BTS was simply too big, too globally embedded, too economically important to the Korean wave for one scooter incident to bring him down. And that raises a real question. Is accountability in K-pop based on the severity of the offense or on how powerful you are? Suga went on to complete his military service, release more music, and continue his career. But if you talk to older Korean fans, the ones who remember the news cycle in real time, they'll tell you that August night in Yongsan changed how they looked at Minyoungi. Not because the act was unforgivable, but because it proved something every fan eventually has to accept. Idols are human. They mess up. And sometimes, the ones you least expect are the ones who stumble the hardest. But if you think a DUI on a scooter was enough to crack the top of this list, wait until you hear what happened with the next member, because their scandal didn't just trend on Twitter. It almost caused a diplomatic incident between two entire countries. Number 6. Jimin. The t-shirt that almost started a war between two nations. Let's set the scene. It's late 2018. BTS is not just big, they are a global phenomenon operating at a level no K-pop group has ever reached before. They've just wrapped their Love Yourself World Tour, they've spoken at the United Nations General Assembly, and their album Love Yourself, Answer, has debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 for the second time that year. Western media can't stop writing about them. The Korean government is literally using them as a cultural diplomacy asset. They are, by every measurable standard, the most influential musical act in Asia and arguably the world. And then, one old photo resurfaces on Japanese social media and everything catches fire. The photo showed Park Jimin, BTS's main dancer, the angelic-voiced member known for his gentle smile and emotional performances, wearing a t-shirt. Just a t-shirt. But this wasn't any ordinary shirt. Printed across the front was an image of a mushroom cloud, the unmistakable silhouette of an atomic bomb explosion, alongside a photograph of Korean citizens celebrating liberation from Japanese colonial rule on August 15, 1945. The text on the shirt read patriotism and liberation in both Korean and English. Now, to understand why this single piece of clothing detonated an international firestorm, you need to understand the history. Korea was under brutal Japanese occupation from 1910 to 1945, 35 years of colonization that included forced labor, cultural suppression, comfort women atrocities, and systematic attempts to erase Korean identity. When the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, Japan surrendered and Korea was liberated. For many Koreans, that moment, as horrific as nuclear warfare is, represents freedom. It's complicated. It's painful. And it is deeply, deeply sensitive on both sides. So when Japanese media outlets picked up the photo of Jimin wearing that shirt, the reaction was volcanic. Japanese netizens called it a celebration of nuclear tragedy. Korean netizens called it a celebration of independence. And suddenly, BTS, a pop group, was at the center of one of the most emotionally charged historical wounds in East Asian geopolitics. TV Asahi, one of Japan's biggest broadcasting networks, was scheduled to have BTS appear on their flagship music show, Music Station, in November 2018. Within days of the T-shirt controversy going viral, TV Asahi canceled the appearance. Their official statement cited the need to consider the feelings of those affected by the imagery on the shirt. The cancellation made front-page news in both countries. Japanese politicians weighed in. Korean politicians fired back. Diplomatic commentators started writing op-eds about whether a boy band could actually damage bilateral relations between two of Asia's most important economies. This wasn't Twitter drama anymore. This was geopolitics wearing a pop culture mask. And it didn't stop there. Once Japanese media started digging, they pulled up more footage, a separate incident where Jimin had been seen wearing a hat with the logo of the Korean Atomic Energy Research Institute, and archived clips from a BTS concert where the backdrop displayed imagery related to Korean independence movements. The narrative in Japan quickly shifted from one bad t-shirt to a pattern of anti-Japanese sentiment. Meanwhile, in Korea, an entirely different narrative was forming. Thousands of Korean fans and commentators argued that Jimin was simply expressing pride in his country's liberation, that acknowledging the end of colonialism is not the same as celebrating nuclear death. Korean historians appeared on talk shows explaining the context of the shirt's imagery. Hashtags defending Jimin trended for days. The Korean public, already carrying deep generational pain from the colonial era, largely rallied behind him. Big Hit Entertainment released a carefully worded apology, not specifically for the shirt itself, but for causing discomfort and concern to those affected. They acknowledged the sensitivity of the historical context and expressed regret that the situation had escalated. Jimin did not make a personal public statement about the controversy, which itself became a point of debate. Some felt his silence showed restraint and maturity. Others felt it showed a lack of accountability. What's truly fascinating about this scandal is what it revealed about the impossible position global idols occupy. Jimin wore that shirt reportedly in 2017, during a casual outing, likely without any strategic intent or awareness that it would become an international flashpoint. He's a performer, not a diplomat. But when you're BTS, when you carry the cultural weight of an entire nation on your shoulders, everything you wear, everything you say, everything you post becomes a political statement whether you intended it or not. The t-shirt controversy also exposed a fracture within the ARMY fandom itself. International fans, particularly Western fans, were largely unfamiliar with the Japan-Korea historical context and struggled to understand why a shirt could cause such chaos. Japanese armies were hurt and felt betrayed. Korean armies felt their history was being dismissed. For weeks, fan communities that had been united under one purple banner were arguing with each other across language barriers about colonialism, nuclear ethics, and the responsibilities of celebrity. In the aftermath, BTS's Japanese promotions took a noticeable hit. Several scheduled media appearances were canceled or quietly shelved. Their Japanese label had to navigate an incredibly delicate PR recovery. It took months and a carefully managed Japanese tour in 2019 to rebuild the goodwill that had been damaged. But here's the thing that often gets lost in the retelling. Jimin never actually said a single word about any political stance. He wore a shirt. A shirt that, in South Korea, you can buy at any street market near Gwanghwamun Plaza. A shirt that thousands of young Koreans have worn without anyone blinking an eye. But because Jimin is Jimin, because he belongs to BTS, that shirt became a diplomatic grenade. And that tells you everything you need to know about the terrifying scale of influence these 7 men carry. 1 member. 1 outfit. 2 countries on edge. That's not just a scandal. That's a case study in how pop culture and politics are no longer separate worlds. They never were, really. But BTS made it impossible to pretend otherwise. Now, if a t-shirt nearly shattered international relations, imagine what happens when a member's name shows up in financial documents tied to stock market investigations, and the numbers involved aren't small. That story is next, and trust me, it's a side of BTS you've probably never heard about. Number 5. Jungkook. The golden magne who broke quarantine and broke the internet. Here's something you need to understand about Jungkook before we get into this. This kid, and yes, when this scandal broke, he was still practically a kid in the public eye, had been groomed for perfection since the age of 15. Recruited as the youngest member of BTS, trained relentlessly, debuted when most teenagers are worrying about homework, and then watched as the world slowly built a pedestal so high underneath him that any fall would be catastrophic. They called him the Golden Magne, the youngest member who could do everything. Sing, dance, paint, film, edit, do sports, learn anything in 5 minutes. He was BTS's closer, their ace, the one who got the viral fan cams with hundreds of millions of views. By 2020, Jungkook wasn't just a member of BTS, he was arguably the single most famous young man in South Korea. And that's precisely why, when his name appeared in a government contact tracing report during the deadliest phase of the COVID-19 pandemic, the fallout was unlike anything the K-pop industry had ever witnessed. It was late April 2020. South Korea was being hailed internationally as a COVID-19 success story. The government had implemented an aggressive test and trace system that was the envy of the world. Social distancing mandates were in full effect. Citizens were being told to stay home, avoid gatherings, and absolutely under no circumstances visit crowded nightlife districts. Itaewon, Seoul's most famous entertainment neighborhood, packed with bars, clubs, and restaurants, was specifically flagged as a high-risk area. Health officials were practically begging people to stay away. And then the news broke. Dispatch, South Korea's most notorious entertainment news outlet, the TMZ of K-pop, reported that Jungkook had been spotted visiting multiple establishments in Itaewon's nightlife district during the social distancing period. Not just passing through. Not a quick dinner. According to reports, he had visited a restaurant and then moved to a bar in the area, socializing with friends across multiple venues in a single night. And he wasn't alone in the headline. 3 other top-tier idols were named alongside him: Mingyu from 17, Jaehyun from NCT 127, and Cha Eun-woo from ASTRO. 4 of the biggest names in K-pop, from 4 of the biggest groups in the industry, all caught violating social distancing guidelines in the same district on the same night. But here's the thing, while all 4 faced backlash, Jungkook took the heaviest fire by a landslide. And the reason is simple, he was the biggest. When you're a member of BTS, you don't get to share blame equally. You absorb it disproportionately. Korean media ran his name in every headline. News anchors who had never covered K-pop in their lives were suddenly discussing Jungkook's nightlife choices during a national broadcast about pandemic compliance. Government officials, actual elected politicians, publicly commented on the situation, expressing disappointment that public figures were setting a poor example during a national health crisis. The Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention confirmed that contact tracing had been conducted and that none of the individuals involved had tested positive for COVID-19. But the damage wasn't medical, it was reputational. Big Hit Entertainment released a statement confirming that Jungkook had indeed visited the area, that he acknowledged his error in judgment, and that he was deeply reflecting on his actions. Jungkook himself apologized, and the company stated he was cooperating fully with health authorities. The 3 other agencies, Pledis, SM, and Fantajo, issued similar statements for their respective artists. But the public reaction? It was merciless. In South Korea, where collectivism and social responsibility are deeply embedded cultural values, breaking quarantine guidelines wasn't just a personal mistake, it was seen as a betrayal of the social contract. At a time when ordinary citizens were sacrificing their livelihoods, canceling weddings, missing funerals, and isolating from elderly parents to protect the community, Here were 4 young millionaires partying in Itaewon. That was the narrative, and it stuck. Korean online communities like The Coup and Nate Pan exploded with criticism. Jungkook's name trended on Korean portal sites for days, not with purple hearts, but with angry comments. Some fans tried to defend him by pointing out that the establishments he visited were legally open and that he hadn't technically broken any laws. And they were right. Social distancing at that time was a strong government recommendation, not a legally enforceable mandate. But in the court of public opinion, that distinction meant nothing. The timing made it worse. Just weeks before the Itaewon outing, a massive COVID-19 cluster had been traced back to nightlife venues in the exact same district. Dozens of infections were linked to clubs in Itaewon, triggering a wave of fear and a second round of aggressive contact tracing across Seoul. The entire country was on edge about Itaewon specifically, and then 4 idols were found to have been hanging out there. The optics were devastating. What made this scandal particularly painful for ARMY was that it wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistranslation or a taken out of context photo. Jungkook went out. He socialized. During a pandemic. And for a fandom that had spent years defending BTS against every accusation, every smear, every baseless rumor, this time, there was nothing to defend. The facts were the facts. And that forced a real reckoning within the fan community about what unconditional support actually means. Do you hold your idol accountable when they mess up? Or do you explain it away because you love them? Now, this wasn't Jungkook's first brush with controversy either. Just months earlier, in November 2019, he had been involved in a traffic accident in Hanam-dong where he made an illegal left turn and collided with a taxi. No one was seriously injured, and he and the taxi driver reportedly settled the matter amicably, but he was still booked by police for violating traffic regulations and causing property damage. 2 incidents in less than 6 months for the member who was supposed to be the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the human embodiment of main character energy. It was a harsh reality check. The Korean public has an incredibly short fuse for repeat offenders, even when the offenses are relatively minor by global standards. What saved Jungkook, ultimately, was a combination of factors. BTS's sheer economic gravity, ARMY's mobilization to shift the narrative, and perhaps most importantly, time. The pandemic moved on. New scandals replaced old ones. And Jungkook continued to deliver performances, releases, and moments that reminded people why they fell in love with him in the first place. His solo debut with 7 in 2023 shattered streaming records worldwide. But ask any Korean journalist who covered the Itaewon story, and they'll tell you the same thing. That was the night the Golden Magne learned that in South Korea, there's no such thing as being too big to be held accountable. The pedestal the public builds for you is the same pedestal they'll tear down when you disappoint them. And Jungkook? He disappointed them at the worst possible time. But hold on, because if you think breaking quarantine was a PR nightmare, wait until you hear about the member whose scandal wasn't about breaking social rules, but about breaking financial ones. We're talking stock markets, insider trading allegations, and numbers with a lot of zeros. The next story doesn't just raise eyebrows, it raises legal questions. Number 4. V. The leaked photos that exposed K-pop's biggest secret romance. Let's be real for a second. In the world of K-pop, dating isn't just frowned upon, it's treated like a criminal offense. Agencies put no dating clauses in contracts. Fans build entire emotional ecosystems around the fantasy that their idol is single, available, and somehow, cosmically, waiting for them. It's an unspoken rule that has governed the industry for decades. You can be talented, you can be beautiful, you can be the most charismatic performer on the planet, but the moment the public finds out you're in a relationship, the illusion shatters. And a portion of your fan base will turn on you with a ferocity that makes tabloid journalists look gentle. Every idol knows this. Every agency knows this. And Kim Taehyung, BTS's V, the man literally voted the most handsome face in the world multiple times, knew it better than anyone. Because when you look like that, when your every glance at another human being gets dissected by millions, the target on your back isn't just big, it's enormous. And in 2022, that target got hit with a missile. It started quietly, the way these things always do in K-pop. An anonymous account on a social media platform posted a photo. Just one photo. It showed two people sitting together in what appeared to be a private setting, a car, some said. The image was grainy, slightly obscured, and under normal circumstances, it could have been dismissed as a fake or a look-alike situation. But the internet doesn't do normal circumstances. Within hours, facial recognition analyses, outfit matching investigations, and location cross-referencing by obsessive netizens confirmed what the agencies were desperately hoping would never go public. The two people in the photo were Kim Taehyung of BTS and Jennie Kim of Blackpink. Let that sink in for a moment. The most popular male idol in the world's biggest boy band, dating the most popular female idol in the world's biggest girl group. This wasn't just a dating scandal. This was the K-pop equivalent of a royal wedding announcement, except neither party had consented to the announcement, and the invitation had been sent by a hacker. Because that's the part of this story that transforms it from gossip into something genuinely disturbing. The photos weren't leaked by a paparazzo hiding in bushes. They weren't snapped by a fan who happened to be in the right place. These images were stolen. Extracted from private accounts, personal cloud storage, or direct messages. The exact source was never publicly confirmed, but the consensus among cybersecurity analysts and Korean media was clear. Someone had hacked into private digital spaces and was systematically releasing intimate moments that were never meant for public consumption. And it didn't stop at one photo. Over the following weeks and months, more images surfaced. Batch after batch. V and Jennie on what appeared to be a vacation together. V and Jennie in casual settings, dressed down, no makeup, no stage personas, just two young people spending time together like any normal couple. Each new leak sent shockwaves through both fandoms. ARMY and Blink, two of the largest, most passionate, and most notoriously territorial fan communities on Earth, were suddenly locked in a civil war that played out across every social media platform simultaneously. Some fans celebrated, posting purple and pink hearts, saying they were happy their idols found love. But a significant and very vocal segment reacted with rage. Taehyung's most possessive fans, the ones who had built parasocial relationships so deep that they genuinely felt betrayed by his romantic choices, launched coordinated harassment campaigns against Jennie. Death threats flooded her social media. Edited photos designed to humiliate her went viral. Hashtags demanding that V dump her trended in multiple countries. It was ugly. It was dehumanizing. And it revealed the darkest underbelly of idol culture in a way that no academic paper or documentary ever could. On Jennie's side, Blink mobilized defensively but was equally fractured. Some defended her right to date. Others blamed her for distracting V from BTS or accused her of using the relationship for clout, an absurd claim given that Jennie was already one of the most successful soloists in K-pop history. But logic has never been a prerequisite for fan wars. The agency's response, or rather, their lack of response, became a scandal within the scandal. Hybe, BTS's label, initially declined to comment, issuing their standard line about personal matters being left to the artist's privacy. YG Entertainment, Jennie's label, took a similarly evasive approach. For months, neither company confirmed nor denied the relationship. This strategy, which had worked for agencies in previous decades when the news cycle moved slower, completely backfired in the age of Twitter and TikTok. The silence was interpreted as confirmation by some, as cowardice by others, and as a deliberate PR strategy by the more cynical observers. What nobody in a position of power adequately addressed was the crime at the center of it all, the hacking. Here were two global superstars whose most private moments had been stolen and distributed without consent, and yet the dominant public conversation wasn't about the violation of their privacy or the criminal act that enabled it. It was about whether they were really dating and whether fans had the right to know. That disconnect is chilling when you think about it. The leaked photos essentially normalize the idea that celebrities, particularly K-pop idols, forfeit their right to a private life simply by being famous. And the sasaeng culture that enabled the hack, the network of obsessive stalker fans who buy and sell idols' personal information, flight details, phone numbers, and private photos on underground markets, was barely scrutinized in mainstream coverage. The focus stayed on the romance, not the crime. Eventually, Korean media outlet Dispatch, the same outlet that traditionally reveals a celebrity couple every New Year's Day, ran a full feature seemingly confirming the relationship. Reports emerged suggesting that V and Jennie had been dating since 2022, had been seen together in multiple international locations, and that their relationship was an open secret within industry circles. By the time the story fully saturated the news cycle, the conversation had shifted yet again. Now, people were debating whether Dispatch's involvement was journalistic reporting or a coordinated reveal timed to manage the narrative. The emotional aftermath lingered far longer than the headlines. V, who had always been one of BTS's most emotionally open members, the one who cried freely on camera, who shared poetry and art with fans, who once described ARMY as his closest friends, became noticeably more guarded on social media after the leaks. His posts became less personal, more curated, more distant. And who could blame him? The world had proven that any moment of vulnerability, any glimpse behind the curtain, could be weaponized. Jennie, too, pulled back from personal sharing, focusing her public presence on professional content. Two of the most expressive, emotionally generous artists of their generation were forced to build walls around themselves because the systems that were supposed to protect them, their agencies, the platforms, the law, had fundamentally failed. What this scandal ultimately exposed isn't just that V was dating someone. It exposed the entire rotten infrastructure of idol privacy, the sasaeng networks, the hacking black markets, the agency paralysis, and the fan entitlement that treats a human being's love life as public property. Taehyung didn't commit a crime. He fell in love. And for that, he was punished by the very people who claimed to love him the most. Now, if you thought a private life being torn open was invasive, just wait. Because the next member's scandal didn't play out in leaked photos or fan forums. It played out in financial filings, brokerage records, and the kind of numbers that make regulators sit up straight. We're moving from hearts to hard currency, and this one? It's got layers. Bar chart. Number 3. RM. The UN speaker with a dark lyrical past that haunts him to this day. Picture this. September 24, 2018. The United Nations General Assembly Hall in New York City. World leaders, diplomats, and Nobel laureates are seated in the same room where decisions about war, peace, and the future of humanity have been made for decades. And standing at the podium, dressed in a tailored suit, speaking into a microphone that has carried the words of presidents and prime ministers, is a 24-year-old rapper from Ilsan, South Korea. Kim Namjoon. RM. The leader of BTS. And he says the words that would become one of the most quoted phrases in modern pop culture. Speak yourself. He talks about self-love, about overcoming fear, about learning to listen to your own voice instead of being silenced by the world. UNICEF selected him. The United Nations invited him. Global media praised him as the voice of a generation, a young man who used his platform not for vanity, but for advocacy. It was beautiful. It was historic. And somewhere in the deep corners of the internet, someone was already preparing to tear it all down, not with lies, but with his own words. Because here's what the UN speech didn't mention. Before Kim Namjoon became RM, the global ambassador, before he was the thoughtful leader who quoted literature and visited art museums and spoke about mental health with the emotional intelligence of a therapist, he was Rap Monster. And Rap Monster had bars that, by today's standards, would end a career before it even started. The resurfacing began gradually, the way internet archaeology always does. A fan-translated lyric here. A SoundCloud track from 2009 there. A feature verse on an underground mixtape that predated BTS's debut. And as international fans, particularly Western fans who discovered BTS during the Love Yourself era, started digging into RM's pre-debut discography, what they found didn't just surprise them. It shocked them into silence. Multiple tracks from RM's early underground career contained lyrics that were explicitly misogynistic. Not vaguely. Not in a you could interpret it that way sense. We're talking lines that objectified women, reduced them to sexual props, and used language that treated femininity as something to be dominated and consumed. One track in particular, Joke, released in 2015 as part of his first official mixtape, contained lines that critics described as aggressively vulgar and dismissive of women. Other pre-debut tracks were even more raw, written when Namjoon was a teenager trying to establish credibility in South Korea's fiercely competitive underground hip-hop scene, a space that, much like its American counterpart, often rewarded shock value, hypermasculinity, and lyrical provocation. But the lyrics weren't the only problem. As BTS's international audience expanded beyond Asia, English-speaking fans discovered something else. RM had used the N-word multiple times in recorded tracks. Specifically, in early covers and references to American hip-hop songs, RM had included the slur in his performances and recordings without apparent awareness of its racial weight. For Korean audiences in 2010, where the cultural context around anti-black racial slurs in America was poorly understood, this might have gone unnoticed. But for the global, multicultural army that BTS was building by 2018, it was indefensible. The backlash came in waves. Black fans and allies within ARMY were the first to raise the issue publicly, posting compilations of the problematic lyrics alongside screenshots of RM's UN speech. The juxtaposition was devastating. Here was a man preaching self-love and respect to the world while his own artistic history contained the exact kind of dehumanizing language he was now publicly condemning. Twitter threads analyzing his lyrics went viral. Think pieces appeared on major music publications. YouTube video essays dissecting the problem with RM's past racked up millions of views. And the criticism wasn't just coming from outside the fandom, it was coming from within. Longtime ARMYs who had been fans since debut were forced to confront something uncomfortable. They had known about these lyrics for years and had chosen to overlook them. New fans felt deceived, as though the RM they had been sold, the intellectual, the feminist ally, the woke king, was a carefully constructed persona designed to erase a deeply problematic past. RM addressed his past lyrics on multiple occasions, though never in a single, definitive statement that critics felt fully resolved the issue. In various interviews and social media posts over the years, he acknowledged that his early work reflected immaturity, ignorance, and a desire to fit into a hip-hop culture he admired but didn't fully understand. During a 2018 press conference, he spoke about how his perspectives had evolved, stating that he now recognized the harm in the language he once used and that he was committed to continuous learning. Big Hit Entertainment also acknowledged the controversy, pointing to BTS's partnership with UNICEF's Love Myself anti-violence campaign and their consistent messaging around inclusivity and respect as evidence of genuine growth. And to be fair, there is a legitimate argument that growth should be recognized. Namjoon was 16 years old when many of those lyrics were written. The underground Korean hip-hop scene of the late 2000s and early 2010s was an entirely different cultural ecosystem than the global stage BTS would later occupy. The language, the values, the norms, all of it was different. People change. Artists evolve. And RM, more than perhaps any other idol in K-pop history, has publicly documented that evolution in real time through his music, his reading lists, his museum visits, and his increasingly thoughtful public statements. But here's where the conversation gets genuinely complicated, and this is the part most fan accounts won't touch. Accountability isn't just about apologizing. It's about the systemic question: who gets the privilege of being forgiven for their past? RM is a wealthy, successful, globally adored male artist. His past misogyny and racial insensitivity have been largely absorbed by his fandom, filed under "he was young and he's grown." But would a female idol receive the same grace? Would a black artist who used anti-Asian slurs be given the same redemption arc? The answer, statistically and historically, is almost certainly no. And that uncomfortable truth sits at the heart of this scandal like a splinter that never fully came out. What makes RM's case particularly significant is that it didn't just challenge his personal image, it challenged the entire narrative BTS had built their empire on. Love Yourself wasn't just an album series. It was a philosophy, a brand, a movement that generated billions of dollars in revenue. And the foundation of that movement was sincerity. The idea that BTS was different from other groups because they were real, because they were honest, because they actually meant what they said. When RM's past lyrics surfaced, they didn't just question whether he personally had been honest. They questioned whether the entire BTS brand of authenticity was, at its core, a performance. That question has never been fully answered. And maybe it can't be. Maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle, that Namjoon was both a careless teenager who wrote terrible lyrics and a genuinely evolved adult who means every word he says today. That both things can be true simultaneously. But the fact that the question still lingers, years later, in every comment section of every UN speech clip, that's the real scandal. Not the lyrics themselves, but the doubt they planted. And doubt, once seated, never fully dies. Number 2. J-Hope. The sunshine who built a $1 billion real estate empire while fans could barely afford rent. If there's one word that defines Young Hoseok in the minds of millions, it's hope. Literally. He chose his stage name, J-Hope, because he wanted to be a source of light and positivity for fans. And for years, he delivered on that promise with an almost supernatural consistency. While other members wrestled with public controversies and headline scandals, J-Hope stayed clean. Impossibly clean. He was the mood maker. The hyper. The human serotonin. The guy who danced so hard on stage that you forgot he was a multi-millionaire standing on a platform built by one of the most profitable entertainment empires in Asia. And that's precisely the point. Because J-Hope's scandal wasn't about a single dramatic incident, it wasn't a DUI or a leaked photo or a problematic lyric. It was quieter than that. More structural. More uncomfortable. It was about money. Massive, almost incomprehensible amounts of money. And what it means when the person preaching hope to struggling youth is quietly building a real estate portfolio that most Korean families couldn't accumulate across 3 generations of saving. Let's go back to 2020, the year that changed everything for BTS, not just culturally, but financially. In October of that year, Big Hit Entertainment, BTS's parent company, now known as Hybe, went public on the Korea Exchange in one of the most hyped IPOs in Korean stock market history. Before the listing, Chairman Bang Si-hyuk personally gifted each of the 7 BTS members 68,385 shares of the company. On the day of the IPO, Hybe's stock opened at 270,000 won per share, more than double its offering price, and briefly surged to 351,000 won. At peak valuation, each member's stake was worth approximately 14.3 billion won. That's roughly $12 million per member, given to them. Before a single trade was made, J-Hope, the dancer from Gwangju, the kid who used to practice in cramped studios and once talked about how his family scrimped to support his dream, was now, on paper, a multi-millionaire from stock alone. And that was just the beginning. Korean investigative outlets began digging into the financial activities of BTS members, and what they uncovered about J-Hope specifically raised eyebrows across the country. Property records showed that J-Hope had been steadily building one of the most impressive real estate portfolios among Korean celebrities. His purchases included a luxury apartment in Seoul Forest Trimage, one of the most prestigious residential complexes in the Seongsu-dong district of Seoul, a neighborhood often compared to Brooklyn's Williamsburg for its blend of artistic cachet and sky-high property values. Reports valued this property at approximately 1.7 billion won. But that was an early acquisition. As BTS's earnings skyrocketed, so did J-Hope's investments. Further reporting revealed additional property purchases, including high-end apartments and units believed to be acquired for family members. By the time Korean media compiled the full picture, J-Hope's estimated real estate holdings were valued in the range of tens of billions of won, placing him among the top celebrity property owners in South Korea. A distinction that in any other context might be celebrated as smart financial planning. But the context wasn't any other. The context was South Korea in 2021, and in South Korea in 2021, real estate wasn't just an economic issue, it was a national trauma. Housing prices in Seoul had exploded under the Moon Jae-in administration. The average price of an apartment in the capital had surged by over 60% in just 4 years. Young Koreans, the same demographic that made up BTS's core domestic fan base, were being priced out of homeownership entirely. A generation of 20-somethings and 30-somethings watched as the dream of owning even a modest apartment slipped further and further away. The term Jungkook, meaning soul gathering, slang for scraping together every possible resource just to afford a down payment, became the defining vocabulary of Korean millennial and Gen Z anxiety. People were taking on crippling debt, borrowing from relatives, giving up on marriage and children because they simply couldn't afford a home. The government introduced over 25 rounds of anti-speculation regulations. Housing became the #1 political issue in the country, directly contributing to the ruling party's defeat in multiple elections. And against this backdrop of national anguish, news outlets revealed that J-Hope, the idol whose group literally titled their album series Love Yourself, who spoke about youth dreams and struggles, who positioned themselves as the voice of a generation that felt forgotten by society, was accumulating luxury properties the way most people collect streaming subscriptions. The cognitive dissonance hit fans like a freight train. Online communities erupted, not with the usual fan war noise, but with something deeper, genuine disillusionment. Korean netizens on platforms like the Koo and DC Inside posted lengthy threads questioning the sincerity of BTS's underdog narrative. How can you rap about coming from nothing when you own a property portfolio worth more than a hospital? How can you tell fans to love yourself when the system that made you rich is the same system crushing them financially? How can J-Hope, whose name literally means hope, represent hope to young people who will never, in their lifetime, afford the kind of home he buys on impulse? The criticism wasn't entirely fair, and it's important to acknowledge that. J-Hope earned his money legally. He worked brutally hard for over a decade. He deserved to be compensated for generating billions of dollars in revenue for his company, his country's GDP, and the entire Korean wave ecosystem. No one was arguing that he should live in a studio apartment out of solidarity. The issue was the gap, the vast, yawning, almost obscene gap between the image and the reality. BTS sold a story of relatability. They built their early brand on being the broke boys from a small company who made it through grit and authenticity. Their early content showed them sharing cramped dorm rooms, eating cheap meals, and worrying about whether they'd survive their next comeback. That origin story was real in the beginning. But by 2021, it was a decade old, and the members had long since crossed into a financial stratosphere that made their humble branding feel, to some, like a costume they hadn't taken off. J-Hope became the focal point of this critique not because he was the wealthiest member. The exact financial rankings among BTS members are subject to speculation, but because his public persona was the most aggressively optimistic. He was hope. He was sunshine. And there's something uniquely jarring about discovering that your sunshine has a real estate portfolio that could buy your entire apartment building. What deepened the wound was J-Hope's philanthropic activity, which, paradoxically, became part of the controversy. J-Hope had donated at least 150 million won to Child Fund Korea on multiple occasions, with additional donations to other causes. He was recognized as one of the most generous celebrity donors in the country. But critics argued that charity from the ultra-wealthy is not the same as systemic solidarity. Donating a fraction of your wealth while accumulating luxury assets doesn't challenge the economic structures that create inequality, it just makes inequality more comfortable to look at. It's the philanthropic paradox that haunts every wealthy public figure, and J-Hope walked right into it. Hybe never directly addressed the real estate controversy as a company issue, treating members' personal investments as private matters. J-Hope himself never publicly commented on the criticism. And in a way, the silence was the loudest part. Because unlike a DUI or a t-shirt scandal, there was no single incident to apologize for. There was no mistake to take back. The scandal was the truth itself, the plain, verifiable fact that the man named Hope was living a financial reality that most of his fans could only dream of, in a country where dreaming about homeownership had become a national heartbreak. Seasons changed. The news cycle moved on, as it always does. J-Hope went on to release Jack in the Box, headlined Lollapalooza as a solo artist, and eventually enlisted for military service in April 2023, a move that, ironically, helped rehabilitate his public image in Korea, where military service is seen as the ultimate equalizer. In uniform, everyone is the same. No penthouses. No stock portfolios. Just service. But the questions his scandal raised haven't gone away. They linger in every debate about celebrity wealth, every discussion about the parasocial economy, every time a fan buys an album they can barely afford to support, an artist who could buy the record label outright. J-Hope didn't break any laws. He didn't hurt anyone. But he shattered something more fragile than rules. He shattered the illusion that BTS and their fans were on the same side of the economic divide. And once you see that divide, you can't unsee it. Number 1, Jin. The eldest son, the stock market storm, and the law they literally rewrote because of him. There's a saying in Korean culture, the burden of the eldest is heavy. And if there's one person in the entire BTS universe who has lived that proverb down to the bone, it's Kim Seokjin, the oldest member. The one who debuted not as a trained singer or dancer, but as an actor-student from Konkuk University, who was street-cast by a big-hit scout purely because of his face. The one who spent years enduring brutal comparisons to his more talented group mates, who was mocked by antis as the visual with no skills, and who quietly, stubbornly, painstakingly built himself into a vocalist respected enough to carry solo tracks like Epiphany and Moon. Jin didn't have the luxury of being the prodigy. He was the eldest in a system that worships youth, the broadest shoulder in a group that needed someone to carry burdens the cameras never saw. And when the biggest, most complex, most legally consequential scandal in BTS history detonated, a scandal so layered it involved stock markets, government regulators, family members, and a literal act of national legislation, it was Jin who stood at the center of the blast radius. Not because he asked to be there, but because the eldest always stands in front. Let's start with the money, because in this story, the money is where everything begins and everything ends. When Hybe went public in October 2020, the IPO was more than a business event, it was a cultural earthquake. The company was valued at over 11 trillion won on its first day of trading, making Chairman Bang Si-hyuk one of the richest people in South Korea overnight. Each BTS member, having received 68,385 shares before the listing, suddenly held stock worth billions of won. It was a windfall that transformed 7 performers into stakeholders, not just of a company, but of an entire economic ecosystem built on their faces, their voices, and their brand. But here's where it gets dark. Within months of the IPO, Korean financial watchdogs began receiving tips and reports about suspicious trading activity surrounding Hybe stock. The allegations weren't aimed at the BTS members themselves, not directly, but at people in their orbit. Family members, close associates, individuals who, by virtue of their proximity to BTS and Hybe's inner workings, might have had access to material non-public information, the kind of information that, if used to trade stocks, constitutes insider trading under Korean securities law. Jin's name entered the conversation because of his older brother, Kim Seok-young. A businessman in his own right, Seok-young operated ventures that occasionally intersected with the entertainment and lifestyle industries. When investigative journalists and financial analysts began mapping the trading patterns of individuals connected to BTS members, Seok-young's transactions drew scrutiny. The timing of certain stock purchases, specifically acquisitions made before major Hybe corporate announcements that would predictably affect share prices, raised red flags that the Korea Financial Supervisory Service could not ignore. Now, let's be absolutely clear about something. Being investigated is not the same as being guilty. In the world of financial regulation, scrutiny of trading patterns around major IPOs is routine. Proximity to insiders triggers automatic review processes. And in a situation as unprecedented as Hybe's, where the company's entire valuation was functionally dependent on 7 human beings, making every piece of information about those humans potentially material, the regulatory gray area was enormous. No formal charges were publicly brought against Jin or his brother in connection with insider trading. But the investigation itself, the mere fact that financial regulators were examining stock transactions linked to a BTS member's family, sent shockwaves through the industry and the fandom in ways that no t-shirt controversy or dating scandal ever could. Because this wasn't about optics or public relations. This was about the law. Securities fraud in South Korea carries potential prison sentences. The Financial Supervisory Service doesn't leak investigation details casually. When names surface in connection with their inquiries, it means the scrutiny is real. And for Jin, the eldest, the protector, the member who had always positioned himself as the group's emotional shield, having his family name dragged into a financial investigation was a kind of exposure that no amount of variety show humor or handsome selfies could deflect. Korean media coverage was relentless. Financial news outlets that had never mentioned K-pop ran detailed analyses of Hybe's shareholder structure, mapping connections between BTS members' personal networks and trading activity. Entertainment journalists who usually covered comeback schedules and music show wins suddenly found themselves writing about securities regulations and beneficial ownership disclosures. The scandal existed at an intersection that the K-pop industry had never navigated before, the place where parasocial celebrity meets cold, hard capital markets. And it exposed a fundamental tension at the heart of Hybe's business model. When your most valuable assets are human beings, and those human beings have families and friends and personal lives, how do you build a firewall between private knowledge and market-moving information? The answer, as the investigation suggested, was that you can't. Not perfectly. Not when the entire world is watching. But the stock scandal, as seismic as it was only half of Jin's story at number one. Because running parallel to the financial controversy was another crisis, one that didn't just involve regulators and lawyers, but the entire Korean government, the national military, and a debate so heated it literally changed the country's laws. The BTS military service controversy. Every able-bodied South Korean male is required to complete approximately 18 to 21 months of mandatory military service. It's a constitutional obligation rooted in the ongoing technical state of war with North Korea. For decades, exceptions existed for individuals who brought exceptional prestige to the nation, Olympic medalists, award-winning classical musicians, and certain artists. But pop stars? K-pop idols? Never. Until BTS made the question impossible to ignore. As the oldest member, Jin was the first to face the enlistment deadline. Under existing law, he had to enlist by his 28th birthday, international age. But BTS was, at that point, generating an estimated $5 billion annually for the South Korean economy. They were a diplomatic asset, a tourism driver, a cultural export machine that rivaled Samsung and Hyundai in global brand recognition. Could the country really afford to pull them off the stage for nearly 2 years each? The debate consumed South Korea. It was discussed in the National Assembly. Politicians from both ruling and opposition parties took positions. Public opinion polls were conducted nationwide. Defense ministry officials weighed in. Economists published papers calculating the GDP impact of BTS's absence from the entertainment market. It wasn't a fan debate anymore. It was a matter of national policy. In December 2020, the Korean government passed what the media immediately dubbed the BTS Law, an amendment to the Military Service Act that allowed individuals who had received government medals for cultural achievement to defer their service until the age of 30. Jin, who had received the Wagwon Order of Cultural Merit along with the other BTS members in 2018, was the direct and obvious beneficiary of this legislation. A sovereign nation changed its military conscription law, a law tied to national security on one of the most heavily militarized borders on Earth, because of one boy band. Let that sink in. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Korean men who had completed their service, missing years of career development, education, and personal life, were outraged. Why should pop singers get special treatment when ordinary citizens sacrificed without question? Women's rights advocates pointed out the gendered nature of the debate. that only men were conscripted, and that the national conversation about exceptions never addressed the fundamental inequality of the system itself. Veterans groups called the amendment a disgrace. Even some army members in Korea felt uncomfortable, recognizing that the preferential treatment undermined the group's carefully cultivated image of humility and equality. Here's the truth that ties all 7 stories together. BTS didn't just break records, they broke the illusion that fame is a shield. Every single scandal on this list exists because these 7 men operate at a scale of influence that turns personal choices into public crises, private moments into political debates, and wardrobe decisions into international incidents. They didn't choose that power, but they carry its consequences every single day. And maybe that's the most important thing to take away from this list. Not the scandals themselves, but what they reveal about us. About the systems we've built around celebrity. About the impossible standards we impose on the people we claim to love. About the uncomfortable gap between the fan fantasy and the human reality. BTS are not gods. They're not villains. They're 7 men from South Korea who made extraordinary music, built an extraordinary connection with millions of people, and paid an extraordinary price for the spotlight they never imagined would burn this bright. The scandals? They're just proof that the light was real. Because only real things cast shadows. That's the list. That's the truth. And now, you decide what it means.